Hi, I'm Joshua Maloney, the president of the Veteran Support Club at Cape Cod Community College. This week, we've had several presentations from several agencies that support veterans in and around campus, and also veterans who have overcome significant barriers to education and employment. Our presentation today, this morning, we heard Irvin Russell, a Black Vietnam veteran, and his story going from homeless to educated through the VA system, the GI Bill, VR&E, to eventually become a congressional aide in a debate. This is a perfect example of an individual using the benefits that we're about to talk about. We are very fortunate now to get a presentation by Micaela Black. Micaela Black is from the VA and Vets Success on Campus, and she is a subject matter on VA educational benefits. I have interacted with her several times in the past, both as a student and as my position as the president of the Veteran Support Club. Before I hand it over to her, I want to say a special thank you to everyone who helped put this presentation on, from President Cox to the Tilden Arts Event Center, to all of my presenters, and especially Micaela. Micaela?
Thank you, Josh. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. I was just saying it's a little strange to not be doing this stuff in person, but also sort of exciting to be in this new virtual environment. And I hope it means it reaches more people. My presentation today is split kind of in two. Part one is supporting student veterans, and it's predominantly geared toward faculty and staff understanding the student veteran population a little bit better. I think I wanted to tell you a little bit about my program as well. As Josh mentioned, I work for the Department of Veterans Affairs. I'm a licensed mental health counselor and a certified rehabilitation counselor, which basically means I have a specialty in disability studies and understanding how that would impact someone in the workplace. The VA back in 2009 created a program called Vet Success on Campus, and it's a very specific partnership between the VA and the college campuses, the institutions of higher learning. And it was created out of a need to support student veterans better on campus as they were coming in droves using their post 9/11 GI Bill and were hitting a lot of obstacles, a lot of red tape. So my position was created out of that effort to support veterans better. And I'm fortunate, I'm in Rhode Island, but I'm, because we're a small state, I basically work with all the colleges in Rhode Island and also in Southeastern Massachusetts, which is how I started collaborating more with Josh and John Alexander at Cape Cod Community College. So I'm pleased to be here today. This slide you're looking at here is some of the services that we are able to provide with Vet Success on Campus. But probably my favorite thing about the job is that I can really do anything that I think the student vet population would benefit from. So if that means better outreach to create a more streamlined process for admissions to registration to in-class difficulties or educating faculty and staff on how to better work with vets, we can really do whatever we think is going to be most helpful. So today I'm going to talk about, in part one, I'm going to go over a little bit about military culture, which is on the next slide. Military culture, again, not to insult anyone's intelligence, I think that you've probably got the basics, especially if you're a veteran joining us. But I want to make sure that those who are not directly connected to the veteran community or the military community have a better understanding of who are these individuals, where do they come from, how do they land on campus, and what are some of the struggles they might face, and then knowing that, how do we better assist them? And then if you're going to stick around for part two, which is about 3:30, we are then going to cover in much more detail VA education benefits, understanding the different choices that a student vet may have, how the payment process works, navigating that with confidence, understanding some of the hiccups that can happen with debts and payment stuff, and then really connecting to resources on campus that I've found many student vets don't take advantage of. So really promoting how can you do better in your college experience as a student veteran. So if we can jump right in to part one, which is just a very brief understanding military culture. I found in doing these presentations over the years, if there's a better understanding of this military culture, then the second part of the presentation, how do we help, makes a lot more sense. If I jump right into how do we help, I don't think you're as invested in why it matters that we should help. So there are obviously branches of the military, and again, this is not to insult anyone's intelligence. I know that you're aware of that. But what I want you to look at is what I put in parentheses. We often hear the word soldier as kind of a catch-all for anyone that serves in the military or anyone that's deployed. And that's not actually an accurate statement. And if you've ever called a Marine a soldier, they don't like it that much. So if you're going to use a catch-all, it actually should be service member. And that really covers all of the different branches of service. The reason I mention this is because it's actually less than 1% of the population is in the military. And that's a very, very, very small microcosm of our population in general. And it's even less than 10% have military background. And I put myself in that category. I actually am a civilian working for the VA and for veterans. So when I started this job, I really had to immerse myself in military culture, understanding, basic training, deployment, what does it look like? How do they struggle coming back? I took the time to learn that information because it made me better able to serve the veterans I'm working with. So in basic training, as you know, everyone who joins the military has to go through several weeks of basic training. The weeks vary depending on the branch of service. But it's very much intentionally, they are stripping down the individuality of the person and rebuilding them as part of the team. And I mention that because it's sort of the opposite of what happens when they get to college. So your traditional civilian student might come right out of high school and it's the first time they're leaving mom and dad's nest. And you're encouraging them to think freely and really be their own person. And we're doing the same with all of the college students, but sometimes our military connected students, it's even more of a culture shock because if we can go to the next slide, in basic training and in the military in general, it's very structured. There is a very clear order to everything. There is a very clear hierarchy. You know who to talk to about what. You are told what time to wake up, what you're going to wear, when you'll eat breakfast, your assignment for the day, what you'll wear to the next thing, when there's training. So everything's really mapped out. You're on time for everything. You listen attentively. Everyone has a job. Everyone's going to know that job and do it well, because really the bigger picture is that there are lives at stake. So it's all taken quite seriously. And I've had, this quote at the bottom is really accurate, that leaving the military isn't just leaving the job they used to do, it's really leaving a way of life. When they're training to be mobilized or go into a combat situation, deployment, of course, that gets even more specific, where they're being taught that emotions in general, but particularly weak emotions like fear, anxiety, angst, they have to really control that and funnel it more toward anger and aggression, which it sounds like, whoa, that's crazy, but that's what we want for our military members. And if you think about your first responders, that makes sense that we would want them to be able to mitigate fear and go toward the mission. They're taught to plan for everything, control for everything. Again, lives are at stake. So this is really something that they take quite seriously. There has to be compartmentalization. If something horrible or traumatic or dangerous or life-threatening happens, they still have to remain focused on the mission. So they get really good at squashing that, putting it aside, dealing with it later so that they can stay focused on the mission. There's also a tremendous focus on respect and trust, of course, amongst the unit. You are responsible for each other's lives. So there's a whole other element of feeling that camaraderie and that trust. And one of the things that I think they struggle with on the civilian side is that you can't duplicate that with just the people who wouldn't understand this environment. When I talk to faculty and staff, I often say, when I'm on campus, I assume when they walk in my office that they don't trust me. We haven't met yet, but I assume that the baseline is, who is this lady? Is she really going to be helpful? Does she care? Does she know what she's talking about? And then I get to prove to them that I do in fact care. I want to be helpful. I'm going to do the things I say that I'm going to do, and I'm able to build up the trust with them and develop that rapport. So I like to explain that in a way that, don't take it personally if it seems like there's a little bit of a chip on their shoulder, or they might, seem a little leery of you when they first meet you. They are, you're not one of their people yet, and you can get in that circle if you show them that you are working hard to do that. And all of this stuff, it's ingrained in them. It is very specifically, in there for a reason. And you can't just come home from a deployment and like flip a switch and say, well, I don't need all that right anymore. I'm good. I'm home. I'm back in my civilian job. So it's like learning about riding a bike. Once you know how to do it, you know how to do it, and you can't just flip the switch and turn it off. So this would be a meeting on deployment, just a picture to kind of give you a visual. If you'll notice, everyone's quite attentive. I assure you that nobody was late for this meeting. There wasn't someone who was grabbing a coffee and walked in a few minutes late. No one's going to raise their hand during this meeting and say, Sarge, I think I'm going to sit this one out. Kind of sprained my ankle yesterday. I'm not feeling that great. No one's going to raise their hand and say, maybe we should go east instead because we went west yesterday. It was a little dicey. Everyone's just going to listen. They're going to get their assignment. They're going to pay very close attention because they are well aware that lives are at stake and there's a lot going on here that could go wrong. Now, I always encourage people, think about the last staff meeting you attended. Is that what everyone looked like? Was everyone attentive? Were there some people that were late? Were some people disrespectful? So again, one of my favorite comments that the student vet made when I met him on campus, I said, how are things going? How are you liking college so far? And he said, I feel like I was spit out into the Willy Wonka factory. And I thought that was such a good analogy because it just felt like he was so disconnected from even his same aged peers that were in college. I mean, he wasn't an older individual, but he had been through so much more and his life experience had been so different up to the point of joining college. This slide is one of my favorite. I could spend like 20 minutes explaining this slide, but I won't. But if you quickly look at the during deployment characteristics, accountability, tactical awareness, mission focused, discipline and order. Again, if I asked you, do you think that these are things we should train our military members to instill? And same thing with, police, fire, like, are these things we want them to have as characteristics? We would all say, yeah, absolutely, that seems important. But then if you look at the at-home side, if I covered up the during deployment side and I read some of those, what we would call those characteristics is dysfunctional. The hypervigilance and the inappropriate aggression, conflict and guilt and avoidance, those are not healthy skills, right? So what we train them to use to keep them alive and be good at their jobs then becomes dysfunctional if left unchecked when they return home and try to transition back to the civilian life. So I'm going to change gears a little bit here. I want to talk briefly about our local veteran population, just because I think this matters in terms of understanding the population and the difference between active duty and National Guard or Reserve. And this is something, before I took this job as a civilian, if you asked me the difference, I probably would have fumbled through it, but really didn't have a good understanding of what that meant. And then why does it matter? So if you look at this slide quickly, this is our active duty installations in New England. Not a ton. We're not known for having huge, large active duty bases here in New England. But if we go to the next slide, this is our Reserve and National Guard installations in New England. And there's a lot, right? There's a tremendous amount. Even in Rhode Island, we have an Army and an Air Guard. So the Air Guard is sometimes unique and can deploy more frequently for shorter periods of time, but frequent deployments. So why does this matter? Active duty means that they work full-time for the military. That is their job every day, all day. And then our National Guard and our reservists are our, they're called weekend warriors, where they have a certain commitment during the year that they are obligated to fulfill. But they can also deploy, same as our active duty members. So if you look at this slide here, the picture on the top with the American flag is active duty base housing. So everyone that lives in this area is an active duty member. So that means the spouses are all spouses of active duty. If someone's deployed, everyone in that neighborhood knows that they are deployed and they know what that means. So they're probably going to be much more supportive, be able to kind of stress together, worry together, commiserate together. It also means that whoever is returning home from deployment back into this living situation is amongst others that understand deployment and the return and the dangers and the transition. So there's a lot of camaraderie, there's a lot of commonality. But if you look at the bottom picture, that's just a regular neighborhood. And that's where our reserve and guard members are returning to. These are your police officers, your real estate agent, your teacher, your human resource specialist. They have regular jobs. They are essentially civilians who also fulfill a commitment to the military. So a quick story, we'll give you an example. I worked with someone who was a Rhode Island National Guard member, but he had a specific military specialty and he had to deploy with the unit out of Connecticut, so not his unit. So he drove from Rhode Island to Connecticut, deployed with the unit to Afghanistan. He was deployed for 8 or 9 months, and then he came back. And they came back to Connecticut, and he rented a car and drove himself home to his apartment in Rhode Island by himself. You know, no welcome home. Hardly any neighbors even knew he was gone. It was as if he was returning from a business trip, you know, in Texas, but he was actually in Afghanistan 2 days prior. So there's this sort of, I mean, not sort of, it is a culture shock. And there's a lot of research that suggests that because there is no long ship ride home where everyone can kind of titrate the experience of deployment together, it's too much too fast, and you're expected to just flip the switch and get back to your civilian life. And that's almost impossible. So there is a lot of research that suggests that our guard members and reservists actually struggle more with that transition back to the civilian life. And as I showed you in that slide, we have so many guard and reserve members in our area that this is a common situation amongst the student vets that we're sitting with on campus. So the characteristics of our post 9/11 era veterans would look a little bit different than previous wars. There's certainly more women than in the past, which makes sense. They're a little bit older if we compare them to the Vietnam era vets. But the two here that I want to stress are the multiple deployments that over 40% have deployed more than once, which means more disruption to their family life, more risk of injury, more risk of traumatic experiences, more disruption to their employment situation, more delays in their education. We've never before seen a group of military members that have deployed so frequently as in comparison to this current post 9/11 era of veterans. And again, noting our National Guard and Reservists, never before have they been deployed so frequently. They make up more than 50% of those that have gone back and forth during the Iraq-Afghanistan wars. Some Mythbusters, just things that I like to cover in general. Not all vets, just because they've served, it does not mean that they have deployed or seen combat situations. And if they have been in a combat situation, it does not mean that they automatically are going to be diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder or PTSD. If they are diagnosed with PTSD, it does not mean that they are automatically going to be a ticking time bomb. And I think, you know, the media does a pretty good job of kind of giving us that lens to look through, and it's just not accurate. Not all vets are male. I always stress that with the student vet population. I have so many female vets that will say, oh, I was just at the enrollment desk and I told them I was using GI Bill, and they automatically said, oh, is it your husband's or your dad's? Which is actually really insulting if it was her service and it's her benefits. So my rule is always to assume she is the veteran until she tells me otherwise. And then lastly, not all vets that are deployed are going to respond the same to the combat situations or the stressors. And I'm just going to quickly cover in the next slide some of the common war zone stressors. And the way we would refer to this in the VA is not everyone gets post-traumatic stress disorder, but certainly everyone who's in a combat trauma situation is going to be affected. So we would call that post-traumatic stress. So it would make sense that anyone who was in these type of environments where their life was threatened or they had to do awful things that they weren't expecting to do or that they were told to do, that they're going to be affected by the environment. So I'm not going to read through all of these, but if you just take a quick look at most of them, you know, difficulty concentrating, sleep problems, that hypervigilance, on guard feeling, anger, impatience, the perception of disrespect, discomfort in crowds, sensitive to war references. Now, if I were to say, are any of those potentially problematic on a college campus? Most people would say, oh yeah, a lot of that looks like it might be triggering or problematic. Certainly with today's, you know, everything we have going on today with politics and, you know, lots of events that would be certainly triggering to any student. But then you add in some of the other things that our military members are experiencing, they're coming in with a lot of other stuff that other students, our regular civilian students, don't have to navigate. You know, I have vets that come to campus 30 minutes early so they can take all the back staircases and avoid the crowd so that they don't go into class feeling like they're already going to have a panic attack. Another student doesn't have to deal with that. You know, memory and concentration difficulties associated with their post-traumatic stress disorder or their traumatic brain injury. That puts them on a different level playing field. And maybe they were really, really academically successful in high school, joined the service, and then did sustain a brain injury. So now their whole method of learning has changed, and they didn't even know that until they showed up in your college class. And now they're having to sort of rework the way that they navigate academics. Just quickly, a snapshot of some mental health statistics. Again, I'm not going to read them to you, but I do want to point out that only 5 to 25% will actually be diagnosed formally with post-traumatic stress disorder. And I also like to point out the extremely high rate of sleep disorder insomnia issues, 40 to 80%. And again, I would challenge you to think, how do you feel like that would impact someone in their day-to-day life, sitting in a 3-hour class? Think about the last time you felt sleep deprived, even if it was just for one night. How did that day go for you? And this is chronic sleep deprivation where, you know, sometimes I ask my vets, how are they sleeping? And I'll get more specific. How many hours a night do you get? Oh, I get about 2 hours at a time, maybe 4 to 5 total. And that's decent sleep for them. So there are, again, obstacles that they are dealing with that other students are not having to grapple with. There's also physical problems. As you can see, they're not just walking around on a track. They're in uneven terrain. They're carrying extremely heavy backpacks. They're jumping, they're running, they're jumping out of planes. So there's a lot of physical wear and tear, back injuries, knee injuries, chronic pain, gastrointestinal problems, head injury. TBI is one of the signature injuries of the war. And again, sometimes it's traumatic brain injury, more severe, very, you know, obvious. And other times it's more mild, where they know they got their bell rung, but they didn't realize the impact of it until they show up in school and they're reading the same page over and over and over again. And then this is probably one of my favorite parts to talk about. Again, I could spend a lot more time here. I think this needs to be talked about more, the concept of an inner a belief injury, a moral injury. And this is out there if you want to, you know, look into it more and research it. This is basically when, like, a cognitive dissonance, you know, you believe things about yourself, you have some core beliefs about yourself, the person you are, and the world around you. And essentially that gets flipped upside down. Combat is ugly, war is ugly, awful things are done to you, to other people. You're told to do things you may not agree with. You grapple with that ethically, and it changes your perception of who am I? Who is the world around me? Is this a safe place? Am I a good person? Where you were not that way before. And I like to talk about this, but I also want to stress, you know, they're not coming back broken. They're coming back different. And how could they not be? If you think about anything in your life that was traumatic or challenging, or, you know, anything that really challenged your core beliefs, you know, you came out of it a different person. And so I would like to think of it as one of my jobs is to help them feel less broken and more different, but maybe that different can be a good thing if we put things in place to help them continue to grow. And it really leads to an identity change. Certainly this picture is really poignant in terms of coming back with an acquired disability. If you think of our military members, certainly for most of them, their physical ability, their fitness, many of them are young and healthy and strong. And then to come back as a 26-year-old, having lost both legs with a brain injury and PTSD, I mean, that's a real shift in your whole persona, right? So dealing with who am I now and how do I live the rest of my life? And the impact in so many ways is big. Again, they're not necessarily coming back broken, but different. And then what does that look like? And it really looks like, again, I'm not going to read all these things, but what I want to focus on is the bottom quote, which is a summary of what a lot of vets sort of feel in the sense that there's a huge disconnect. As I mentioned in the beginning, this is a small segment of our population. And for the most part, they return from combat, they discharge from the military, they're joining the regular civilian world. They can't find a job. Nobody values their military experience. They end up stacking paint at Home Depot, and they were a sergeant before. That's a real hit to feeling valued. You know, we think that we're doing a great job because we don't treat them like we treated the Vietnam era vets. We put bumper stickers on our car that say support the troops, and we say thank you for your service. But what are we really doing to show them that we're thankful for their service? That they are not just some anonymous person, that we care that they served. And the thank you for your service comes up a lot because I do have a lot of vets that say, I don't really like it. It feels almost like a catchphrase. And I'm not here to tell you, don't say it, it's rude. It's not that. It's more, think of it like, instead of saying, thank you for your service and running off to get your coffee or catch your flight, why not say something like, thank you for your service. What branch of the military were you in? Did you deploy? What was your military occupation specialty? Ask some questions, take some interest in who they are, not just thank you for your service because that makes me feel better about supporting you. So I get this question a lot after I kind of run through all the challenges and obstacles they might face, because I have a lot of student vets that, you know, they'll discharge from the military and 2 weeks later they're trying to register for classes, and I'm begging the advisors to help them get in whatever classes are available. And a lot of times the college will say, well, what are they doing? Why don't they just take a break? Why are they rushing into college? And really, that's not your decision to make. So the reason they're rushing into college, or seemingly rushing, is because they've earned these benefits. This was not just given to them. They served the country and they knew the risk that they were taking. And now they have these GI Bill benefits and VRNE benefits and state level benefits, and they want to maximize them. And I put some pressure back on the school to say, they are putting a lot of eggs in this education basket. And I think they should, because the value of the education, getting the degree to line up with all their military experience, is the thing that's going to make them maybe successful in this next different phase of their life. And if things don't go well with the education phase, if they struggle with the red tape, if they can't navigate the classes and feel like there's no support and they drop out, I assure you things don't get better for them. This is where we see issues with substance abuse and homelessness and risk of suicide. If they feel like there's nothing left because they couldn't get a job and then they tried college and that didn't go well either, things aren't getting better for them. So I feel like it is our duty as a way to say, thank you, I support you, I care about what happens next. What can we do to keep them engaged, keep them in school, help them be successful in getting that degree that is in fact for the next steps, so that they can be successful in this civilian world. This is just if you know the Billy Madison movie, this will make you chuckle a little, but quickly, a history lesson on GI Bill. First one rolled out in 1944. It was one of the most successful programs we've ever created. It was essentially coined with creating the middle class back then. But what I want to stress here is that in 1947, almost 50% of college students were military, were veterans using their GI Bill. And now it's more like 3%. So what that means is in 1947, if you were in a classroom of 20, 30 people, you could turn around in the classroom and see someone else that got it. They understood what serving in the military meant. They understood that you may have some trauma. They understood what it looked like. And now they feel very much isolated and alone because there's not huge numbers of veterans on campus. And there's much more of a disconnect between those that are not military connected and those that have served. Today's student veteran population is predominantly male, and that's because more males make up the military, but the percentage of females is very high that do pursue, female veterans that do end up pursuing education. In general, they're your adult learners. They're in the older population, 24 to 29, 30% of them. Most of them are married, most have children, and 30, I would say probably more than 30% have some sort of acquired disability. So where might they struggle and how can we help? There's a lot of stressors on campus. Again, any adult student, adult learner could probably pinpoint some of these, but I like to stress that our military members are also navigating the VA benefits, and that is a tremendous world on its own, and part 2 of my presentation will show you that. They're having to merge everything at the same time. They have to apply on time, register, pay deposits, get their GI Bill benefits approved, make sure they're getting certified to the VA, apply for financial aid in case they don't have all the coverage they thought they would have. And then add to that all of the physical and mental health difficulties they're dealing with, grading issues, things that can create debts with the VA, difficulty communicating with professors because they don't think that they can just go up to you and tell you if they're having a problem, or they don't know how to navigate sharing with you what the problem might be, that they maybe need a certain seat in the class because sitting in the back of the classroom and seeing the door is very important to them, but they don't know how to share that with you. So there's a lot of obstacles that they're facing and stressors. And in some ways, connecting them to each other can help mitigate a lot of that. And I'll talk about that in a couple of slides. So what are some best practices before I wrap it up? This comes up a lot with every school that I've worked with, that the grading policy on campus is sometimes in direct contradiction to what happens with the VA benefits. There's a Z grade at Cape Cod Community College, which is basically you haven't been showing up for class, you didn't withdraw, but I'm going to withdraw you. So that grade is very problematic because the student may not be aware that they've been withdrawn, and then it can create enormous debts with the VA. And again, that is not a way to help them stay engaged and stay in school by giving them a $6,000 debt that they now have to pay off with the VA. Yes, that's a problem between the veteran and the VA, but it's not something that's going to change. It's an act of Congress to change VA regulations. So there really are ways that the school can help navigate this. If no other way, explain to a student veteran that them not showing up could lead to a Z grade. Even put it in your syllabus. Student veterans, be aware, if you do not show up for this many classes, you could get a Z grade and this will impact your benefits. And then refer them to the veteran office, refer them to Josh or John or their certifying official, so that they can get a good overview of what that will do to their VA benefits. What does a debt with the VA look like? Other best practices, tutoring services, some of the things that are underutilized on campus. I know that every school provides this stuff, but vets will not readily seek this out. In part, I think it's because they could be sitting with a 19-year-old girl who's tutoring them. And maybe that feels a little awkward because their daughter's 19. So one of the things that I always suggest is take a look at your Dean's List veterans and see if they're interested in tutoring other vets. So it's a more vet to vet connection. It's a great way to connect student vets to each other, and also for them to be able to, I'm sorry, hold on. Sorry, sorry about that. So the other service that I think is underutilized is disability services. Veterans will not readily seek out this service, and I don't know what it's called at Cape Cod Community College, but they do not see themselves as disabled. So doing a better job of explaining what are in-class accommodations, how do I access that? At my schools, we actually created a separate flyer to say, this is what support services actually are. This is how other vets are using them. Another best practice set here is creating a visible website for the student veterans. So something really easy that's on the top of your webpage that goes right to veteran services. Have a checklist available for them, steps that they're supposed to take. Veteran-specific orientations are great. Now we're in this virtual environment, so somewhere they can go to say, how do I use my benefits? How do I know how to apply? What is this payment process going to look like? Taking a look at mentor programs, your transfer process, reviewing military credits. How is that done? How does the vet submit those? A veteran work group is a great place to start, so you can plug into like, who is your veteran community? Priority registration is another thing that I highly recommend on the college campuses. This is something that's usually afforded to the student athletes. So I usually ask that one question: if we're allowing student athletes to have priority registration, why wouldn't we give the same grace to our military connected students? That's one of those things that really goes a long way in actually saying thank you for your service. In-state tuition and fees for all veterans and their dependents, regardless of where they live. We're in New England, so a vet could easily live in Rhode Island but come to a Massachusetts school or vice versa. So having that in-state rate across the board for all military students is another good practice. Things like a veteran relief fund, even if it's just that you can only give $100 per veteran in crisis situations, you'd be surprised how far that can go when they can't put gas in their car or they can't get food on the table. And then lastly, I would say track your student veteran population if you're not doing that already. If you don't know who they are and what majors they're gravitating toward, if you do track that stuff, you can do a much better job of looking at where they go, connecting to those departments better, and then also connecting them to each other by major. This is from the Million Records Project, which was a SVA generated study. This is national data. This is not specific to Cape Cod Community College, but it gives you an idea that if you can say, these are the areas they seem to be gravitating toward, then you have some information about where to target some of your specific veteran efforts. So if we know that they're going in criminal justice or healthcare programs, we can find out, who's in those programs, connect them with each other. This is where you could set up better tutoring, better mentoring, and better collaboration with the faculty and staff. So in summary, is thank you for your service really enough? Are you doing things that are really showing that we're appreciative of their service, that we understand the population, and making sure they never feel anonymous? That's my information. I'm going to switch to my part 2, but I can definitely open up for a couple of questions if that would be helpful.
Hi, Micaela. That
Yes.
was absolutely incredible. I know I've seen presentations like this before, and I certainly learned a lot and took a couple notes. I do have a couple questions that came in. One of them is, so you're not a veteran yourself, but you serve the veteran community. What is the biggest barrier that you learned that helped you interact with veterans?
That's a great question. I kind of fell into working with veterans. Initially, I was in the VRNE program, and I actually worked with veterans, post 9/11 veterans, Vietnam, all the way up to World War II vets. And I think the thing that was, I had to basically learn that I needed to do the homework, that I needed to learn their language, understand their journey, listen. I just listened, and I heard their stories, and I paid attention to their struggles, and then really tried to provide services that mitigated those struggles. And I think you can't do that without listening and paying attention. And I very quickly adopted the mentality that, although I work for the VA, it's not the VA's responsibility to tackle all this. Yes, the VA is responsible for caring for our veterans, but they serve the country. They didn't serve the Department of Veterans Affairs. They served the country. So I think it's an obligation that we should all be taking on to say, how do we help you? How do we help you function better? How do we help you not become homeless? How do we help you stay in college? How do we help you get to that next phase of your career in the civilian world?
Perfect. Another question that just came in. Housing benefits vary by region and state. How does this affect our veterans in the area? A number of them in state are having difficult time living on Cape Cod with such high allowances or such high housing costs.
Yeah, I mean, it's specific to the zip code of the school. So the idea behind that is that the zip code of the school would also dictate the housing expenses in that area. But you could be living, I mean, I have vets that live in Rhode Island and go to school in Boston, and they get the Boston BAH because the zip code of the school is in Boston. So it should reflect the cost of living, and the BAH should reflect the housing in the area. But I know that many struggle to, pay their rent more in terms of it being a timely payment. That if the school doesn't certify on time and the VA doesn't get it on time and there's a delay, if you don't get that month check, you can't pay your rent. And that's the bigger problem, which is why I recommend things like the Veteran Relief Fund. So if someone comes in and says, I can't pay my rent, we are able to give them at least some assistance toward, a crisis type situation.
Thank you so much, Micaela. Can we move on to the next portion now? I would love it if anybody who was staff, faculty stuck around for the first part, feel free, please stay for the second half of it. We can learn a little more and cater our skills a little bit more for our veterans. So back to you, Micaela. Thank you.
Okay, so this is part 2, a little bit more technical. This is going to be a review of basically all the education benefits. I'm going to give you a snapshot. Again, a lot of this can get more detailed, and I'm happy to answer any questions or certainly be contacted on an individual basis about anyone's particular benefits. But basically, I'm going to give you an overview of all the different GI Bills, and then a couple of other benefits that are not GI Bills but still fall in the realm of VA education benefits. Understand the eligibility and the payment process, and then how to navigate that with more confidence. There are a couple of different GI Bills. I like to think of it like an umbrella and then a few different GI Bills that fall underneath. The more common one that we'll hear about is post 9/11 GI Bill. So I'll spend a little bit more time on that one. Then I'm going to cover a dependent education benefit and then the veteran readiness and employment program, which is a really excellent benefit that is often not known about. There's also state benefits. I'm predominantly in Rhode Island, so we have our own set of state benefits, but Massachusetts does as well. And I think it's important to know that there's waivers for veterans in Massachusetts and also a separate waiver for National Guard members. These will waive tuition, not fees, but it's really nice that they can be used in conjunction with VA benefits because sometimes, this is a little confusing, but a veteran might be 60% entitled to GI Bill, which means they're only getting 60% coverage, but they can use these waivers to kind of offset the difference in tuition that might not be covered. And then financial aid is another area that a lot of student vets don't think they can apply for financial aid, more in terms of using grants, because I'm not trying to encourage anyone to accrue debt. But they often don't know that they can also apply for those grants as well and get a little bit of extra living money so that they don't have to worry about paying rent and gas and all that, all those other expenses. So the Montgomery GI Bill active duty, or Chapter 30, it's often referred to as the old GI Bill. This is the one that everyone used before the post 9/11 GI Bill came out in 2009. There is you have to pay into it in order to be eligible for it. So there are service members now that opt out of it because they know that they're going to use post 9/11 GI Bill. And it's uncommon that they would choose this benefit over post 9/11 GI Bill, although there are some circumstances where it would be to their advantage, mostly because this benefit only pays the student veteran a monthly stipend. It does not cover any portion of the tuition, and the new GI Bill or the post 9/11 GI Bill does. So if you were to compare the two, post 9/11 GI Bill is usually going to win out over Chapter 30. The next slide has just a snapshot of the payment. As Josh had mentioned, you're paid based on, this one doesn't reflect zip code. You're paid based on your training status. So if you're a full-time student and in a regular fall, spring 15-week semester, that would be 12 credits. You're getting a little over $2,000 a month. If you're 3/4 time, which is 9 credits, the payment gets reduced a little. And then if you're half time, it gets reduced even more. So I mention this because sometimes the student vets that I work with will actually take full time when they maybe shouldn't, if it's their first semester or they're really struggling, or they've got a heavy science class, because they're trying to make sure they can sustain their expenses with this monthly stipend. So just be aware of that. I like to stress that with advisors too, that's why they're trying to get the full course load. Not always the best in terms of academic progression, but sometimes it's the only way they can sustain paying their bills. The 1606 is also Montgomery GI Bill, but it's Montgomery GI Bill Select Reserve. This is actually fairly common. I see this benefit a lot because we have so many Guard members and reservists in this area. This benefit is actually, they are eligible for this as long as they have a 6-year obligation and they've completed basic training and they have a high school diploma. So this would be our Guard members and reservists who have not deployed, but they are Guard members with a contract or reservists with a contract. So they can use this benefit right away. It's the lesser of all 3 of the GI Bills. It only pays about $400 a month for a full-time student, unless they have a kicker, then that would add to the payment. But it is used fairly commonly because it is for that group of Guard members and reservists, and it's really the only thing they're eligible for in the beginning. Chapter 35 is a dependent education benefit. So this is for dependents of certain veterans, veterans that were killed in action or that died as a result of their service-connected disabilities, or veterans that have a permanent and total 100% disability rating. I feel like this number is going up as a lot of our veterans get older. So we do see quite a few of these dependents on campus. They will often be lost because they're not even the veteran. They don't know how to navigate the VA system. But once they apply, the benefit is pretty easy to use. It's 36 months of benefits, and they also get a monthly stipend. And they can use this benefit in a window of time from age 18 to 26. And on the next slide, I have a snapshot of the payment for this program. So this is really a nice benefit. Again, this is for, most of the time we'll see this benefit being used by the spouse or child of a 100% disabled vet. And one of the things I stress on campus is treat this individual the same way you would treat the veteran. This veteran is 100% disabled and their family member is using this benefit, and we should treat them with the same care and respect as we would the veteran. And it means a lot to the veteran that they know we're taking care of their dependent in that way. So just a quick summary to give you a picture of all the benefits before I go into the two more complicated benefits. Chapter 30 and 1606, just a monthly stipend directly to the student. There is no payment to the school. Chapter 33, there is a tuition and fee payment to the school, a book stipend, and a monthly stipend that go to the vet. I'm going to go over that in a minute. Chapter 35, just a monthly stipend to the dependent, no tuition and fee payment. And then chapter 31 is the most different. It's technically not even an education benefit. That pays full tuition and fees as well. All of the books and supplies also gives a monthly stipend, and I'm going to go over that one at the end. So post 9/11 GI Bill is the most commonly used. It is probably the one that everyone's referring to when they say GI Bill. So I'm going to go over that entitlement for you guys. This is maybe the most complicated one in terms of what it looks like to be entitled. The other ones is just here you're entitled, this is the benefit. This benefit, you have to have a certain amount of active duty time in order to be eligible. That can be, eligibility can be from 50% all the way up to 100%. So if you've got 3 years of active duty, you'll be 100% eligible. And I'm going to show you a chart that goes over the percentage difference. It used to be that you had 15 years of entitlement. So 15 years from the date you discharged, the benefit expired. And it was sort of like a faucet shutting off. There was just no more benefit. If you got out after January of 2013, you got to remember these dates, there is no expiration date. So you have 36 months to use whenever you want. Once the 36 months are gone, the benefit's gone, but there isn't a hard entitlement stop date. And as I mentioned briefly, there is a payment that goes from the VA right to the school for tuition and fees. There's a book allowance that goes straight to the student, and there's a housing allowance that goes straight to the student. So this is the entitlement tiers. Again, this is, so if you're meeting with someone that isn't sure if they're going to be 100, if you say, do you have 36 months of active duty time? No, not quite. They would need to know where they fall in order to determine their percentage. Another, it's not on here, but once they hit 24 months of active duty, then their training time is added in. And that can be really helpful, especially for some of our guard members or reservists who have been in for 20 years and have a ton of training time. As soon as they hit that 24-month mark, all that can be added in. And sometimes that brings them from 60 to 100%. But anything below 24 months of active duty time, the training time does not count toward the percentage of GI Bill. I pulled up the BAH rates for Cape Cod Community College for the zip code. As Josh had mentioned, it's based on the zip code of the school. So you're paid based on your percentage of entitlement. So this is an example of 100% entitled. And then also how many credits you take. So if you're full-time, it's the $22.95. But if you only take 6 credits, that's important that you would note you do not get the BAH because you're considered less than half-time. So this is really important for new students to be aware of. I always like to make sure the academic advisors are aware of this, because if they can just get to that 7 credits, they now have a monthly stipend. And it's also not a waste to not be full-time. If you are a full-time student in a regular semester, you use about 4 months of benefits. But let's say you take 9 credits, you're only going to use like 3 months and 10 days of benefits. So your entitlement is taken off at a lesser rate if you're training at a lesser rate. The book stipend is $1,000 maximum, and this is sometimes confused. I'll hear vets say, well, I thought I was going to get $1,000. It's not a $1,000 check. It's actually about $42 per credit, which ends up being about $500 per semester if you're 100% eligible full-time student. So if you take fall, spring, and summer classes, often by the summer session, you will not have any book stipend left until the next academic year. So that's another important thing to consider, that if you're taking summer classes, you might need to save some of your Pell Grant money or put some money aside to be able to buy books for a summer session. And then remember, with post 9/11, your percentage is factored into everything. So if you're 60% entitled, you're getting 60% of the book stipend, 60% of the BAH, 60% of the tuition and fee payment. There is a different BAH rate for classes that are only online. So if you go to a Southern New Hampshire University or one of the online schools that only offers online training, You're going to get a reduced rate, which is $895.50 per month. And that's like half the national average. So it's significantly lesser than what the regular BAH rate would be. And again, your percentage would be factored into that as well. I wanted to put this in there so that people don't panic. Due to COVID, most classes have been moved online. So there is a special provision right now that's in place through December of 2021, which essentially protects your BAH. If the school is saying, we've had to move everything entirely distance learning, so you have no option to take an on-campus class, you're fine. You're still protected. You will get the regular rate. As long as the class you are taking would have been on campus, you need at least one class that would have been on campus if not for COVID. And then you still have your regular rate versus that much lesser reduced online rate. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here, but I wanted to make sure I put in a slide about transferability. Post 9/11 GI Bill can be transferred to dependents. The most important thing to know, there is a requirement for how many years you have in, and you must sign on for 4 more years. The most important thing I wanted to stress is that if I have anyone listening that is still active duty or still in the Guard Reserve, if you want to transfer your benefits, you have to do it while you are still in the service. It is a Department of Defense decision to approve that. It is not a VA decision. So if you discharge from the military and then think you're going to transfer benefits because you decide not to go to school, you will not be able to transfer the benefits. You can move the months around. So if you've got 3 kids and you give them all, 6 months and want to add more later, you can do that after you get out. But you have to be approved to transfer to your dependents before you leave the military. And then the last program I wanted to cover is Veteran Readiness and Employment, which is Chapter 31. It used to be called Voc Rehab and Employment, but that name was actually kind of deceiving, and a lot of vets turned away from it, thinking it meant rehab like alcohol addiction or Voc Tech schools, which is not the case. This program is actually not, it's not a GI Bill, it's not even an education benefit, it's an employment benefit, but it can pay for education as a means to get to gainful employment. So the process to apply and become entitled is very different than what you would see with GI Bill. You actually have to meet with a Voc Rehab counselor, a VRNE counselor, who will assess if you are entitled. They are looking at your service-connected disabilities, and they are looking specifically for barriers to employment, which becomes relevant. So if you are a 10% service-connected for hearing loss, you actually would not be entitled to Voc Rehab or VRNE, because there is no barrier to employment attached to hearing loss. But if you're 10% for knee injury and you have a GED and you're a roofer, you would be entitled to VRNE because you shouldn't be doing a roofing job if your service-connected disability is a knee injury. So those are kind of 2 examples of 10%. Most vets fall in that 30, 40, 50% range or higher for a multitude of maybe physical and mental health stuff. So they would be looking at that, and then also looking at your level of education. If you're applying to VRNE and you already have a master's degree in accounting and you're successfully working and making good money and there's nothing that's aggravating your disabilities, you actually also wouldn't be entitled even if your disability was 90%. Now, if the job was aggravating your disabilities, then you would be entitled, because the whole point of the program is to mitigate for those service-connected disabilities and help you be gainfully employed. This program also provides 48 months of benefits, which is different than the 36 that is provided under the GI Bills. This is just kind of a flow sheet with VRNE services where you apply, there's an initial evaluation, and then they're kind of working with you to determine what is your goal, where would you like to go to school, what kind of job do you want to pursue. So they're really assessing these things that really any veteran should be looking into if they're going to use benefits, but it's actually built into the services that they will be working with each veteran specifically to tailor their track for services. Some common questions that I get about VRNE that I wanted to put up here. Can I use GI Bill and VRNE at the same time? No, you have to pick one benefit or the other, but you could go back and forth. You could use GI Bill, decide to go to VRNE, maybe not like VRNE for some reason and go back to your GI Bill. That is entirely up to you. Another question I get is, do I get 36 months under GI Bill and then a whole other 48 months under VRNE? Unfortunately, that is also a no. The months that you use under GI Bill will actually show as deducted from your total 48 when you show up in VRNE. And then the last one is probably the question I get most often. Should I use up my GI Bill first, since I get 36 months of that, and then change over to VR&E? And this is a resounding no, because in most cases, if you use up your 36 months, you probably have a degree, maybe a bachelor's degree. And remember, VR&E is looking at your employability. So if you show up in their office with a bachelor's degree, you are in fact more employable. Doesn't mean there aren't some barriers, but you're reducing your chances of meeting the entitlement criteria versus switching over to VR&E because you know that you might be entitled. And it is a very comprehensive benefit. So there are very few instances where I feel like you wouldn't want to change over to VR&E if you think you're entitled. Okay, so this last part, I just wanted to focus on some accessing resources, kind of some tips that might launch into some questions for the end of this here. So I always encourage the vets that I work with to really choose their major wisely, which doesn't mean you have to know right away the very first semester what you're going to major in, because you can take those gen ed classes, those, history, psychology, all the classes that you need toward any degree. But once you start to get into that third, fourth semester, you should start really looking at, what do I want to major in? Or if you're trying to go towards something, maybe healthcare, like you think you want to do nursing, take anatomy and physiology, take biology, see how you do, see if you feel confident in those classes, see if you're going to make the grades to get into nursing. And if not, start making a plan B, because it's the vets who change their major too many times or perhaps fail too many classes and have to retake them. Those are the ones that are at the highest risk of using up those 36 months and not having a degree at the end of it. And that's a pretty lousy situation, because now you've got to revert to the state level benefits or just financial aid. And you had the benefits there to use. So you could have gotten the degree if you just, did a little bit of legwork on what am I going to major in? What's a good match for me? Classes each semester have to count toward your degree, which sounds like common sense, but this comes up every semester where someone's taking something that they think is to transfer to another school. So it makes sense that they're taking it. But then the certifying official has to say, no, that doesn't count. You can't take it. And now you're only going to get paid for 9 credits versus 12. So be mindful of that. And I always, Cape Cod Community College is a community college, and I work at CCRI as well. So a lot of my community college students are looking at transferring. So do your homework there as well. Be aware of the classes that are more likely to transfer to the 4-year degree. Not all of them transfer as easily. And the last thing you want is to have to retake classes at the 4-year degree college. JAA programs are wonderful. And I know Cape Cod Community College has a lot of JAA agreements, so definitely look into those. And then reach out to schools that you're looking at. A lot of schools will work with you to do a preliminary degree evaluation even before applying, so you can get a better sense for how long is it going to take me to get a bachelor's degree there versus there when I only have maybe 10 months of GI Bill left. Withdrawing from classes or any kind of the punitive, non-punitive grades, be very careful of this because they have a direct impact on your VA benefits. The VA is paying you for completing courses. You can actually complete a course and fail it. You're still completing it. You just got an F. But if you withdraw or you are withdrawn from a class, like a Z grade, debts are created with the VA, which can be very problematic. If you don't notify the VA of the withdrawal and there's no valid reason, they will create a debt back to the beginning of the semester for your tuition and fees, all of your BAH, and the book stipend. So we're talking thousands and thousands of dollars that it doesn't make it any easier to stay engaged when you have all that money to pay back. But if you have mitigating circumstances, meaning you got sick with COVID, or you had a medical issue, or you were hospitalized, or someone in your family needed you, or your job changed your schedule, or you were deployed, or you went on military orders, those are all valid reasons for having to withdraw. And in those cases, as long as the VA knows that you had a valid reason, they stop the payment as of the date you withdrew, and you don't have to pay back. So if you were in school September, October, November, you keep those payments. And then whatever from there on is not, like if you end up getting a check for December, that would be the only part of the debt. So it's really important that you're aware of that. If you're struggling, you don't have to remember all these details, but just know as a student vet, if you're at risk or seem to need to withdraw, or the professor says you're going to have to withdraw, reach out to the veteran office or the certifying official and get some details on what that's going to look like for you. And then I wanted to show some of the underutilized programs that I see on campus. One would be the Student Veteran Organization. Cape Cod Community College has one. Join it, get involved, connect with your fellow student veterans. It's a really good way to stay engaged. There is research that says those students who stay engaged on campus actually have better GPAs and a higher rate of retention. So that matters. VA Work Study is another program that is underutilized on campus. I'm happy to answer any questions about that. Disability services, I just mentioned that in part one. This is not something that I find many of my student vets flocking toward, but I cannot stress enough how helpful it can be to kind of mitigate some of the difficulties that you might experience in the classroom, just in terms of seating preference, the ability to leave if you need to take breaks because you tend to get anxiety, preferential seating, extra time on tests, the ability to record lectures. If you're having a bad day, I've had a lot of vets say, well, I woke up feeling really lousy and I knew I wasn't going to be able to concentrate. So they didn't show up to class. But if they knew they could record the lecture, they would show up to class to at least have their recording device there to listen for them, even though they were having a bad day. So some of that stuff can make a big difference. Tutoring services, mentoring programs. I think the more you can do that vet to vet, the more successful they'll be. Really connecting to academic advising, making sure the advisors on campus understand VA benefits. And then financial aid. I have so many vets that will come in like third or fourth semester and say, I didn't know I could be getting a Pell Grant every semester. Why didn't anybody tell me? So educating vets, letting them know that they can certainly apply for that. Decline the loans if you don't want to deal with those, but at least take the grant money to help you financially while you're in classes. And that's it. Any questions?
Micaela, I can honestly say that I learned a lot.
Good.
And I've been at this VA education thing. Seemingly, it feels like a lot of us spend a lot of time here, and we truly appreciate it. So I want to let everyone know that it is 4:02. Feel free to sign off if you would like. We, as long as it's okay with Micaela, we're going to stay for another 5 or 10 minutes too. We got some really great questions that came in, and feel free to send in any more questions if you're in here. So Micaela, again, thank you so much. That was tremendous. I did learn. First question, is there a cycle or time frame for receiving benefits before starting class?
Cycle or time frame?
And that, yeah, so that's a question to me oriented from a college perspective, that it's a very confusing thing to answer via the VA because it's complicated.
So do you mean the timing of when you'll receive a VA payment?
I would say how long? I would say yes, that's it.
Okay. Great question. I wish I could give like a super concrete answer, but it's dependent upon several factors. So the first one is, have you applied for the benefit and does the VA know you're eligible? That would be number one. If that's in place, then does the school know you're using benefits and have they certified you, right? That's number two. And then it goes into probably the most unpredictable part of the phase, which is the VA education gauntlet. And that's Buffalo receiving all the certifications and just processing them as they come in. So if the certification is done early and VA education is on point with things, which they mostly are these days, then you probably will get the payment around the first couple of weeks of the semester. Now, technically, that is not even when you're supposed to get it. That is just something that was put in place by the schools in the VA to get the payments out, particularly the book payments. You're technically supposed to be paid for the completed month. So with the other benefits, Chapter 30 and 1606 and 35, those students will not get paid. If classes start September 3rd, their first check is not even due until October 1st. That is when they're supposed to get paid. So if your GI Bill doesn't come until October 5th or 6th, technically that's still on time in terms of how they technically pay the benefits. But what we really try to do on the school end and the VA end is get the payments out as quickly as possible, because it just helps to get your books, get you settled. Worst case scenario, and I still see this sometimes where I'm working with vets right now that aren't getting paid. They're contacting me saying, hey, it's November, I still haven't gotten anything. Sometimes they forgot to submit like a veteran worksheet, so the school didn't even know to certify them. Sometimes they're brand new and they didn't submit the correct GI Bill application. So there's all sorts of variables that can snag the payments and cause problems. But yes, in a perfect world, benefits would be in place, you'd get certified early, and VA would pay you early as well.
Thank you so much. We have another question. How would you respond to a challenge that sometime that a teacher, faculty, or staff is giving a veteran more accommodation than another student?
Would this be sort of like an in-class accommodation or unofficially accommodating?
I would say both, not the unofficial accommodation, but maybe if it's standard practice to give everybody a Z, if we recognize, okay, well, we're not going to do that to someone pursuing VA GI Bill benefits because we understand across the board it creates a problem. So I would say both, but more over the first one.
Okay. So yeah, I see this a lot with, we call it a WPWF at CCRI, and it happens often. And I think the way I like to look at it is, if you go back to the spirit of when that Z grade was created, if you ask someone in the upper administration, why do we have a Z grade at Cape Cod Community College? The answer is probably going to be, we created that grade in the spirit of helping students. Because if they disappear and don't come to class, it's better if we would withdraw them versus fail them, and then their financial aid gets all caught up in things. So in the spirit of it, it was to help students. But if I then turn around and say to you, but with this particular student who's using military benefits, you are very much hurting them, then you've negated the whole spirit of having a Z grade in general, right? So although it may look like you're giving special treatment, what you're really doing is looking at a student and saying, I don't want to create this added burden for you, which it is. It's an added burden compared to the civilian students. You're not setting them up for a better situation if they now have a $6,000 debt, maybe more, with the VA, when all you perhaps had to do was put a note on your syllabus about it. That's enough to alert vets, if that's all you want to do. Student veterans, be aware. I implement the Z policy in the following way. This may affect your VA benefits. But on the other side, I would say, if a student disappears from your class, especially now during a pandemic, aren't we giving everyone a little bit more attention in terms of where are you, what's going on? And if they're flagged as a student veteran, kick it back to the veteran office. If you're a very busy faculty member and you can't be doing that, you can't be outreaching students, tell the veteran office, I have a student veteran who disappeared, I'm concerned. At the very least, they can reach out and they can share the impact of, this is what's going to happen to your VA benefits. And then the student, that might prompt them to re-engage. That might be enough for them to say, okay, no, I got it together. I'm gonna show up now. So I hope that answers the question. That does come up quite a bit.
I think it did, and I think you answered it tremendously. As a veteran, I think you answered it tremendously. One more question. Where are the educational benefit centers? How, or do they operate out of National Guard or military facilities, and how do we interact with them?
Good question. So every National Guard unit has an educational liaison. So do the reservists. I find that in the National Guard units, they're usually really easy to find, and they interact quite a bit with the schools because of waivers and things like that. On the reserve side, it can be a little harder. I've worked with reservists who are in Rhode Island but have an education coordinator in like New York. So the other thing to consider is that some of them have been doing the job for 20 years and some are brand new. And I can say I've been working with VA benefits, education benefits specifically for 10 years, and it's a lot. There's a lot to learn. There's a lot of ins and outs. There's a lot of caveats. There's a lot of entitlement criteria. So ask questions, ask good questions, but definitely try to find the people that really know the answers to your questions so that you're not getting looped around, and most importantly, not getting misinformed. And the other place you should look is many college campuses have some sort of veteran presence. They may not have a veteran office or a center. I mean, a lot of our vet populations are too small, but there's an SVO or there's a certifying official who's a wealth of information. So seek out the people that are most likely to know, or at least know what they know and can send you to the people that know more, if that helps. And I'm happy to be a resource to anyone who has questions about this stuff.
It absolutely would, and that transitioned perfectly into our saying goodbye for today. Micaela, thank you so much. I've already received incredible feedback, and as a veteran student, I've interacted with you before. I already knew how useful you were. I really appreciate how we're sharing that knowledge, and hopefully some teachers and some other student veterans can get that out. I want to say a big thank you to Cape Cod Community College for helping this be a presentation. Also, especially the events department. They have made this possible and really made this a fantastic event. I want to plug our next event. So tomorrow's Veterans Day. Happy Veterans Day. We do not have an event. Feel free to go get free food if you're a veteran at one or another restaurants. You're entitled to that. But on Thursday, join us at 3 p.m. for an interview with Charles and Charles Daly about their recently published book, Make Peace or Die, A Life of Service, Leadership, and Nightmare. He's going to be talking about his trials and tribulations since deploying to Korea in the 1950s. So again, thank you so much, and I look forward to seeing you in the future.